This shirt is one of 3 pieces created as part of my core design classes during my time studying in Parsons, Paris. It took roughly 2 months from the initial idea phase to finalization, with a lot of that time consisting of research, toile iterations, material study, and pattern corrections. Although I've been learning how to sew and design collections throughout the past 4 years, this project definitely pushed me to think about aspects of garment creation I hadn't really considered before. So in this video, I want to go through what that process was like, the details of the garment itself, and what I would do differently when designing future collections and garments. This shirt utilizes the archetypes of both the standard white-collared button-up and the necktie, remixing the traditional approach to create a look that focuses on playfulness and colorful mess while still maintaining the traditional aspects of tailoring found in both the shirt and the necktie. There are a total of 9 neckties stitched directly onto the front left panel in a variety of orientations and places, with the lengths of some extending far beyond the garment hem and onto the floor. One additional tie is independent from the front and can be worn around the neck like normal. There is a standard collar and front button placket with a small piece of plastic boning that gets tucked into a channel on the under collar, which is normally referred to as a collar stand. And that helps maintain the stiffness of the collar without adding too many layers of interfacing fabric or weight, and it also allows for a flexible structure that kind of tucks the tie onto the neck nice and snug. Adapted away from the standard archetype is my use of the plackets that split the side seam and center back, the function of which helps create a subtle but striking bow illusion, utilizing gathering through 12 buttonholes along the upper back, threaded and pulled together with a shoelace that rests on the inside of the piece. The side seams then have one single button that allows for the back panel to lift up when gathered independently of the front panels, and this allows for a kind of freedom for the back to gather as much as it needs without pulling on or disrupting the straightness of those front pieces. Each necktie is 3 pieces of fabric that get pressed into shape and then slip-stitched close along the inside length to hold the fold line in place. Given the variety of fabrics used for this project, there were multiple characteristics like stiffness, stretch, and weight that each fabric had. In order to get a consistent drape with each, some ties have a layer of flannel throughout the inside that provides support and structure to fabrics with a much lighter drape that are maybe more prone to sag or fold more so than others. This also provides additional weight that makes the tie feel a little bit nicer in the hands and on the body. After many iterations of mood boarding, I landed on a concept that revolves around how a child might view their parents' work and wardrobe. I know when I was younger, I was always very interested in the professional adult life because it seemed like kind of a mystery to me, which did motivate my curiosity. I wanted to channel some of that energy into how a kid might approach designing or styling their parents' wardrobe based on a more colorful and kind of unaffected perspective that leans into the playfulness of being a kid without succumbing to what is often a very mundane and boring part of adult life. I was also giving myself some freedom as an adult to explore these ideas because while I have grown to enjoy the intricacies and precision of classic tailoring, I do recognize that the corporate work life is not only boring, but also tends to uphold more traditional social norms, which I definitely didn't want to contribute to. By merging the 2 different ideas into one piece, I ended up with a design that is both intricate and intentional, but also a bit more rebellious and anti-capitalist. The design for the final look of the shirt didn't necessarily come to me right away, but the general idea of a colorful mess of neckties popped into my head pretty early on, especially when thinking of how children's spaces, like their bedrooms, can become colorful messes through just the natural act of play. I knew I wanted to make the look interesting through styling and details as opposed to big shapes and vibrant fabrics, and often in office wear, neckties are one of the few styling accessories, especially for men, that allow for individual expression. I'm sure you've probably had a school teacher or coworker at some point who was kind of known for having fun tie prints, sometimes correlating to whatever activity was occurring that day. Some of my first material samples focused more on the vibrance of the messiness, but it felt a little too far from the recognizability of tailoring fabrics, so I decided to go for a range of shirting and quilting cottons instead. After finding a few prints that I liked, I started drafting and stitching the ties before I had a shirt pattern made, and I did this in part because I thought it would be a quick way to visualize the prototype. Ironically, each tie ended up taking anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour to complete, but it did prove beneficial to moving the look forward, because I was able to pin them to the various toile iterations and get a good feel for how the final version would actually look. The shirt itself had a total of 5 iterations before landing on the pattern that I felt was best. I went back and forth in my mind about what size I wanted it to be, and initially drafted it to fit on myself. While this was initially kind of frustrating, I actually ended up only needing to do relatively minor adjustments to areas like the neck hole and sleeve length in order to actually tailor the fit to the proportions I ended up wanting. And I also got in the habit of printing each fitting iteration out and noting it in the sketchbook, so even if I wasn't sure the exact fit I wanted right off rip, I was able to start with the toile that I had and then sketch onto the images to try different lengths, drop shoulder amounts, and pointedness of the collar. At this point, the remainder of the look left a little more to be desired, especially because I knew the pants would be a more simple pleated trouser that was mostly going to be obscured by the shirt, and I will make a video about that next. It took about a week of thinking, doodling, and ramming my head into a wall, until during our weekly check-in time, my professor pinched a little piece of the back fabric just to mess around and see what kind of drapes could be interesting, and it immediately clicked to me. Going back to when I was drawing the 2D lineup for what the rest of this theoretical collection could look like, I kept coming back to the introduction of the bow. It kept popping into my drawings, and especially when it was integrated into the back of the garments. Some of my earlier sketches showed a panel of fabric that wrapped around the sleeves of the blazer and gathered into the center back seam, and although it didn't feel fully baked, I couldn't shake that visual from my mind. Because I had this in my head already, in the span of 3 seconds, the steps to complete the look became immediately clear, and I started polishing the drape on my toile into a proper pattern. This was a really rewarding step forward that still had some work to do, but made the final piece so much more interesting. While overall I am very proud of the final product, there are a few changes I would make if I had to remake the look. For the ties, I would have liked to understand the pattern more because all the tips came out a little bit wrinkled, and you need to sew them as a mitered corner, which made sense on paper, but I ended up just kind of finessing the stitching process to get a result that looked mostly correct. I think there's a lot of room for finesse in the details with something like this, and I would be curious to see how my results would turn out differently if I tried again, knowing what I know now. I think the shirt is pretty strong, but something that makes the fabrication of this piece difficult, and really any shirt for that matter, is just how thin shirting fabrics are, paired with how precise a lot of the seaming is. Often the top stitching on shirts is anywhere from 1 to 3 millimeters away from the hem, and without proper practice, seam guides, and in some cases specialized machines, achieving this kind of result can be kind of difficult. Because of the plackets that go along the side seams and back, I ended up going for an overlocked and top stitched seam along the sleeves. I don't think it made a huge difference in the final outcome, but finding some way to flat feld those seams would be nice and is something I have less practice in. I think reducing my use of overlocking and aiming for no visible edges in my future work is definitely a priority of mine. On a design level, I do think the wearability of this piece is something I consider a staple of a lot of my designs, but I keep getting this itch to make an entirely conceptual look that leans much more complex and kind of ignore the wearability to a certain extent. I do think it'd be interesting to see what I could do with this idea if I went even crazier. Adding more ties, distorting the shirt archetype even more to an extreme degree, I think that could prove to be really interesting. Getting to share this piece feels really exciting because the process of making it at a new school, in a new city, in a completely new environment was a super unique opportunity, and I really look forward to seeing how my approach to design, both through archetypes and conceptually, kind of changes and evolves now moving forward. Just like anything, there's always room for improvement, so I would love to know what about this project you guys liked, what maybe you didn't like so much, and if you were making it yourself, what would you guys do differently? Also, if there are any specific questions about parts of the process that I didn't cover or maybe didn't go into that much detail about, whether that's on the design front or the fabrication side of things, please comment and let me know, because I would love to make a video going into more detail. I'm still figuring out what to do here on YouTube, so any and all ideas are more than welcome. Bye!